Well, today I'm going to start the dive into bindings. And I'm not sure how deep we should go because, boy, this goes deep. This is deep. This is the definition of the rabbit hole. um, and yet, there's a lot of simple stuff that we can do, and so I'm going to focus on that stuff. And but today, I'm mostly just going to go over kind of what's available in our own community right now that can get people started, because a lot of it involves a lot of step-by-step instructions and screenshots and stuff like that, which we already have in abundance right there in the forum. It's just finding it and getting to know some of the stuff that's around. When I post this to YouTube, I'll include a whole bunch of links to the specific sections that are in the forum that have a lot of files that are all ready to go, racks that are ready to go, whole songs that are ready to go that already have the bindings and other settings in existence, right? So, but today I figured I'd get rolling by at least showing people where the various resources are so they can begin digging in, fool around with some of the examples, and play with some of the free resources that are out there. Okay? So, I've set up, let me go ahead and share my screen. And I've learned share sound has to be set to stereo high fidelity or it doesn't get sent to stereo high fidelity when you're sharing. There you go. So you should hear a little bit of sound. Very strange sounds, I admit. Okay, so I loaded this in. I'm not sure we're even going to dive into the bindings so much yet, but I thought at least show a basic setup with 2 keyboards, 2 sounds, my processing rack to get stuff out to the system, and be able to point to there's where the bindings go. Now, I already have a bunch of bindings in my background rack. And you get to the background rack through View Background Rack. I hope everyone's seeing this okay.
Yes, good.
And these are primarily the loopbacks for my BCF 2000 controller from Behringer. So this is the import coming in, and what it's affecting is gain, output gain and stuff. And I'm hitting it on an object level that the objects in the rack, boom, this being object 1, object 2, object 3. So these are what are affected by the objects, so that when I move an object slider, then it moves on my Behringer. And that's the basic idea. So,
Is that indexed?
hmm?
In other words, if you move the stereo one axis up, would it become object one?
Yeah, that's right. Processing rate. If I put it absence to the top, it becomes object 1. Exactly. So it's sort of like moving your tracks around in Mackie mode. That of which slider it always gets applied in the order left to right that it appears in the mixer. I'm going to get deeper into how I connect my Behringer through the background rack, and we'll go over this. This is kind of a good example of a simple reapplication of the same idea over and over again. It's sort of like a mixing console. When you walk in a recording studio that first time and you see a 24 track or 32 track or 64 track mixing console, and you're going, oh, how does anybody figure out how to use this thing? And they don't realize it's just the same strip repeated over and over again. So there's really only 10 things to learn, and then remember what track is assigned to which one, So this is similar. Once you find out that an input port can be channelized, and so I could use controller 7, CC7, just on a different channel, over and over again and have it then hit my objects, gain control. And so object 1 being right now the massive, and object 2 being absinthe, object 3 being the processing rack. So there you have it. It's a pretty basic, simple little example of using a background rack and how you're just repeating. And then at the bottom to send stuff back, it's just a reverse where I grab from object 1 and grab its gain, which was the target here. Now it's the source. And now what was the source is the target channelized to the controller 7. Okay. You do have to be mindful of these levels. If you don't see, I've got these at -6. I should have done that down here too. It's so that your maximum isn't going to infinity and beyond. You don't want to have full volume be infinity, because that's usually plus 12 dB on most output devices. So I set to -6 because I use this for streaming so much, and I want to limit how much my maximum is going to be going out at all times, so I'm never overloading, never having fear of overloading. So I -6 it. Okay. Well, anyway, that's a quick tour of a typical background rack use, because obviously I would want this background rack and its bindings to be in play no matter what song I have loaded in, so that I can always use the Behringer BCF 2000 or X-Touch or any other, what's that, fader port. Yeah, they have fader port 1 with 1 slider and fader port 8 with 8 of them. Same ideas, and they all work pretty similarly. Anything that's a motorized slider is going to work that way. Okay, well anyway, let's jump right into the stuff I've saved in terms of stuff to look at. Well, first place, of course, to be mindful that it exists is the bindings section in the user guides. It's got a little on this page over here on the right side that is helpful for jumping through here, because there's a lot of little sections. And it also kind of summarizes what you've got. You've got your overview, the editor page, which is just to click on the bindings thing. How to use Learn to get the source, MIDI Learn, and how to also be able to learn the targets using MIDI Learn. Learning the parameter bindings, targets, and various settings that you can do. Jump prevention for rotaries, and the routing modes, which is definitely, you gotta take a look at this. A lot of people don't even realize continue, suppress, and block are even in there as modes. So it's a good thing to kind of know for certain things, because if you've suppressed the same input coming into the top one, then it's suppressed for all of the following items using that same input. Get what I'm saying? So you would need to say continue. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a lot of rules and regulations involved in using bindings that you got to kind of familiarize yourself with. But most people jump in and kind of go intuitively and try to figure out, they set an input and they look at that drop-down list of input types and actions and targets, and they just kind of noodle it through. But most of that info is in here. The SysX bindings, by the way, there's a whole guide, a separate guide just on using SysX. If you've got some hardware that can receive SysX commands, then you can set up bindings. And a lot of people use the Cantabile buttons that are in Cantabile for this purpose, to kind of send stuff to their hardware sense. But you can use it for routing any button to send any SysX string. And we talked about the background rack. and song rack and background rack bindings. There's a kind of a parsing order to them. The most important part of all this is song bindings take precedence over background bindings.
That you combine it with the settings about continue or blocking. So if you block something, an event in the song, then it will not reach the racks or the background rack. So I think that was the what he meant on this one.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that clarification. All right. Special event kinds. This is a list of the different types. And just the other day, we were talking about the difference between a no edge button and a regular button and a switch. And this covers it. The basic idea of no edge is that the others don't actually send a value. Well, a regular button doesn't send a value until there's a change over or under the 64 spot. So if it just changes from 35 to 36, it doesn't actually respond. Whereas a no edge sends a signal, it sends to the trigger on any non-zero value. It's going to move. That's, again, what my understanding is. If you know different, correct me always, but I hate it when I misinform people, but you know, I used to be a professor, and you know why they call us that? Because we profess to know stuff. Oh, yeah. Anyway, and you get the bindings to roots. Well, again, the instructions are great, but until you actually dive in and start applying some of these things and fooling around with them, a lot of it won't become really crystallized in your mind. But the more it's one of those things that when you dive in, the more you play with it, the more you use it, the more you get comfortable. You get in the comfort zone with certain ones, and you start being able to layer them and combine different ideas. Now, there's also a good video in the walkthrough videos that introduces people to the whole bindings thing. And so that's I'll include a link in to that in the YouTube video. Now, when you get into Cantabile and you hit the little magnifying glass, if you search for bindings, you will get a ton of sorted by relevance, whatever that means in this case, because you've got just all over the map, all dates going all the way back to 2016. I think I found some even earlier. 2016 was pretty much when Cantabile 3 came out. And a lot of improvements have been made over the time. So I would do it like latest post or latest topic or something like that. But then again, we have a pretty robust little search thing. And so you can look for certain types of things, who posted it, and categories. We could look just in the shared files category, for instance, and just see those posts that actually have files that are being shared. I'm going to get into that in a bit. But the search engine is very, very useful because the reason I'm bringing it up is because we have so much going on in the community that spells it all out, gives step-by-step instructions, and some amazing things like the mega utility auto fader. It's unreal. And the simple one. It's like, what? And we have a community racks exchange. I'm going into that in a moment. But there's a lot of information, and the thing that's important is that it's either step-by-step instructions of how to learn to generally apply these principles yourself, or there's a demo rack ready to download, or a whole demo song ready to download. Now, some examples of where things keep evolving is back in May of 19, we got media player bindings added so that you could have the media player have an intro song, for instance, running, and at the end trigger a whole bunch of bindings to kick in and change your port. So they could be backing tracks. And when it changes, bingo, your states all change or your programs change. And it could do a host of things. It could turn on a light show. It could do all kinds of stuff because we have MMC, MIDI machine control capabilities also. So there's a lot of things that I think, just from reading the post, have barely been scratched on the surface for the capabilities. And when you got something that involves the media player bindings having just even existing, and now there's some new ones. I couldn't find the link to it, but there's even more going on with this. So anyway, we'll get to that. Just a few months after this was released in May, by November, Humphrey added this huge article on doing a live loop control method, and wrote this really long, huge article. And of course, you click on the images, and it gives you the expanded version, so that you can move through the different screenshots and see how it works. This is where loop ranges are kicking in. Loop ranges as control functions. So that's pretty exciting. Does anyone else think that's exciting, or am I just easily excitable? No, this is exciting. Well, and we have another addition back in 2016, but in response to the need to have one thing trigger another, or be able to trigger a song activity from a rack's bindings, for instance, so that you could save your bindings in racks and load them into any song and have them accessible. Well, the Loopbacks became a real handy thing. And so that's a whole blog post, and I'll have a link to that. It kind of opened up a huge area that, again, is barely touched. But it's not always available. I hope you're seeing my Cantabile screen now. In order to have the background, have those racks open up, you have to click right here under miscellaneous. You have to click this box, show loopback ports. Now they can be dangerous because a loopback can create a feedback loop if you're not careful about how you're routing this thing. And that's why, by default, when people load in to install the program, it's not checked. So once people graduate from, being an early Cantabile user, then it magically checks itself. No, it doesn't. So you finally find out that they exist by watching webinars like this and reading posts. And you go and check it, and now you've got in the outputs, you've got the loopbacks. So in bindings and in here, and geesh, all over the place. Just littered with
I was always wondering why I never saw those.
Ah, yeah, that would be it. So yeah, they have to be turned on. So look at that, a warning. Yes, don't create the feedback loops. Boy, and they're dramatic too. Nothing like a MIDI feedback loop. Okay, so he has a little discussion of future uses. Mind you, this was written way back in 2016 when all things were fresh and new. And it has evolved, and it is improved, and it has a whole bunch of uses. And so we will dig in the next couple webinars into more stuff. And Monday is solo day, and I'm going to mostly be covering the bindings that are available exclusively to solo, and that where it does not have access to some of the ones that we have in Performer. But I do want to cover the things that people in solo can use bindings for. Alrighty, now an example of using bindings was my LinPlug issue. I have the LinPlug Spectral Synth, and it has a browser for its banks because it has oodles of banks. And this is becoming a very common scenario with all kinds of modern synths, because they come with 1,000 patches, and so those patches are broken into banks. And so I found out through trial and error that, lo and behold, if I used Cantabile's bank system, which is the bank number first and a period, then the patch number inside that bank, that I could finally get access using a binding to individual patches in all of the banks in Spectral. So that was there's a use case where only bindings really could have solved this issue and made it so I could make huge patch lists. But once assigned, it became very nice. So there you go. So like in this case, it's bank 13 right there, patch 77. So it would be 13.77 to get to that patch. Now, lots of people don't realize that there is a bank access system, but it works with many, many synthesizers that have these complex banking systems. We should probably go into that, just how to access some of the patches beyond using the parameter sets and the other approaches. There are some direct MIDI ways to approach many synthesizers, okay, using straight ahead program change messages. All right. Now, here's a search using the word loopback as another criteria, or I could have done the same thing, bindings here, and looked for something tagged loopback if there such exists. No, it doesn't. Or I could look for loopback and search for bindings. And whoever managed to tag things, I would find a search on bindings and loopback together reveals a bunch of things that discuss that. And of course, you could just do a search on loopback by itself and find out some people posting about applications for loopback. I didn't want to go digging into that like crazy. I do want to dig into some of the examples that already exist for us. There's a shared files category, and you can search using shared files, and it is a category of its own. And it shows articles like this, the Autofader Simple and the Autofader Extreme, or whatever they call it, whatever Dave called it. That gets into full articles about setting up things like an autofader. And the autofader is just marvelous. You can trigger it by so many different means and have all kinds of stuff do an autofade on you. So you can finally pull autofade, so you're not worrying about finding your expression pedal and doing a real sloppy autofade out. Finally, professional sounding autofades are available to you on stage. So this is the kind of articles you're going to find a lot. Not as extensive as this. Dave really went to town with beautiful diagrams and huge explanations, and then a zip file so that you could just throw it in and play with it.
Dave is always precise on his stuff. It's so good.
It's like a whole program.
Yeah. And that's where I was discussing the shared files category that shows a lot of different things. One of those things is the C3 utility racks section, and I'm going to have these links all in the YouTube video, and I'll put them in the article at the forum too, in the playback page, I guess. But there's a whole bunch of utility racks in here. These are mostly by Dave. The only time you see me even in here is just to say, this is amazing, this is fantastic, wow, etc. I'm pretty useless in this section, but I do have my own where I do make some contributions in the Community Racks Exchange. So I have some contributions, and many of them, most of them, use bindings extensively. And so these are all, mostly these are the, well, you know, we had that whole webinar on, what did I call it? Abstracting a controller. And most of these abstract various controllers. But you don't have to own this controller to make use of these files. These files are good starting points for anybody that's got any controller, pretty much. It just is going to have certain values might be different. You might have to go in and change the source. You're going to have to, well, you'll have to change the input source for each one of them. Or change the name of your controller so that it's the same name as the input source, or make it a, I think aliases will work, where you could just put in for your controller an alias that I used for the inputs, and I think then they'll appear in bindings. But my main point is that these are all available, so they're great if you have these particular synths or plugins, etc. But the concepts are universal, and so you're going to be able to use them and recycle them for other uses. Okay? So that's the Community Racks Exchange. Super duper. And this, again, this is the shared files section. Looks like I just showed it again. It's probably going to go through it a little more. But like, look, expression pedal auto fader utility rack. The early idea, I would guess, from October of 18 compared to the Monster Killer version from this year. So, yeah. Okay. And oh, that was just me making a post. Well, so that's the bulk of my initial presentation, was just to show the resources and allow people to get started on thinking about it. And then in subsequent presentations, go into a deep dive into some of them. I'm going to take requests on the forum and here. If there's any particular ones that you would love for me to do a actual installation video, you know, where I actually do it, like the auto fader. I read the article and do it.
I think that one of the, you know, it's just going back to when I first saw bindings is, and you know, you've already covered it a bit, but is the whole idea of don't go into a synth and start MIDI learning the knobs directly. You know, build a rack where the, you know, your knobs do different things in different synths, but you know, you bound them in Cantabile, so it's sort of organized. Does that make sense? You know, that's just one of the things that, you know, that I've done a little bit of, but I want to learn more about binding so I do it better.
Well, I find that the Learn is great for getting information about some of the sources and targets and finding out what they are.
Right.
Especially when you're doing knobs in a synth, you got to find out how the, you know, what it's called, what the synth calls that automation parameter, because there's no true constants. Plus, they use different numbers because they're all really numbers in the background,
Right.
And with different labels on them and assignments. So it's a good way to find out what automation parameters they've called them.
I don't think I've ever done learn a target.
Yeah, there's a way to
This
learn
would be
the
good to know.
target. It says create parameter binding, but this is look at me with MIDI controller, so.
Or on-screen setting.
Bind to, oh, position 1.
But yeah, it already knows what you want to bind it to, so it's only the source that you can learn.
And it says position 1 right at the moment. Learn from. Okay, so I learned my control. I did get the knob to work on position 1. I moved this thing. When I said create parameter binding, oh, it did. What do you know? Okay, I had to move it. That's had to be what it was. Not just click on it. Move on it. Go to parameter binding.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know.
Do that, and it says yeah. And now that's that one. The magic was here in the drop down. Create parameter binding after moving a control. Now there might be some of these. This is just these guys up here. I don't know if I can do that with this. I can try. Move that. Go create a parameter binding. Move control. But look, I think not. It's still saying position
Yeah.
1.
Maybe that's how
So-
massive works. They want you to put it in that macro thing
Yeah,
up at the top.
exactly. And that might be what this is right here, the macro or something. Yeah, there's a way of connecting these. I think that's what these numbers are. But nonetheless, we did get a series of bindings that did come right out of automation. And we were able to learn them just using the parameter thing for a VST synth. So that's kind of neat. So we could learn all of the settings, or we could assign all the settings possible for a synth and have this list and save it with the song. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this one up then. Unless you got some specific things you want to dive into, fool around with.
No, it's good.
Okay, great.
It's good overview, I think. Sort of just lay of the land, right, of bindings and
Yeah,
kind of things you can do
sort
with
of
them.
start with just how deep they can go. It's a super deep subject. We could probably do a whole thing on them, just on each one of the drop downs. You could do cover a whole bunch of stuff. So, yeah, it's so deep. Well, gee, this is what you can get done just with controllers, notes, pressure and pitch band, and all that kind of stuff is pretty fantastic. And of course, RPN and NRPN that's pretty much relegated to hardware synths. And your master volume, master balance there. All right, well, thanks a lot for coming out.
Yeah, thanks, Terry.
Yeah, always fun. What can I say? Let me stop share. Here we go. Alrighty. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Yep.
Till
take care.
next time.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.